A millionaire's Arabic insults backfired spectacularly when he discovered his stupid waitress spoke 5 languages and held degrees from Columbia University. Ahmed Hassan thought he could mock Sarah in Arabic at an upscale Manhattan restaurant, calling her unintelligent and poor while she served his table with professional grace. His cruel commentary about her cheap clothes and obvious lack of education was delivered with the smug confidence of someone who assumed service workers were beneath his intellectual level. Then Sarah responded in flawless Arabic, revealing her linguistics degree and law school credentials before dismantling his character in front of the entire restaurant as phones captured every devastating word for millions to witness. Ahmed Hassan adjusted his $50,000 Rolex as he surveyed the upscale Manhattan restaurant with obvious disdain, his perfectly tailored Armani suit and gold-plated cufflinks marking him as the type of wealthy patron who expected immediate attention and flawless service from establishments that catered to New York's elite. "This place better live up to its reputation," he muttered to his business associate Marcus Thompson, a fellow real estate mogul who had recommended Jardin for their high-stakes merger discussion that could reshape Manhattan's luxury development market. "I don't have time for incompetent staff or subpar cuisine when we're discussing a $2 billion acquisition that requires absolute discretion and professionalism." His voice carried the entitled arrogance of someone who had inherited wealth rather than earned it, speaking loudly enough for nearby diners to hear his complaints about service that hadn't even begun yet. The hostess, a young blonde woman named Sarah, approached their table with the practiced smile that expensive restaurants trained their staff to maintain even when dealing with obviously difficult customers who viewed service workers as beneath their consideration. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Jardin," Sarah said with professional warmth. "My name is Sarah and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink while you review our menu?" Ahmed's response would transform an ordinary dinner service into a viral social media moment that would expose his character to millions of viewers worldwide. "Listen carefully, girl," Ahmed said in Arabic, assuming that the young waitress couldn't understand his native language. "This girl looks very stupid and I don't think she can handle our complex order." His cruel assessment was delivered with a smirk that suggested he took pleasure in insulting someone who couldn't defend herself against his linguistic advantage. Ahmed continued his verbal assault in Arabic, growing bolder as he assumed Sarah's polite smile indicated ignorance rather than professional restraint in the face of obvious disrespect that she was choosing not to acknowledge immediately. "Look at these cheap clothes. Obviously she's from a poor family and can't even afford decent clothes to work in a place like this," Ahmed said with increasing volume and contempt, his words designed to humiliate someone he viewed as powerless to respond to his attack. "I bet she didn't finish high school and works here because she can't do anything else in life," he continued, his voice dripping with the kind of class-based prejudice that assumed service workers were inherently inferior to wealthy customers who could afford expensive dining experiences. Sarah maintained her professional composure throughout the verbal assault, her training as a server requiring her to provide excellent service regardless of customer behavior. But her eyes reflected growing anger at the assumption that she couldn't understand every word of his cruel commentary. "Would you like me to explain our wine selection in Arabic, sir?" Sarah asked in perfect unaccented Arabic that caused Ahmed's face to flush red with embarrassment and shock. "Or would you prefer I translate the menu for you so you can better understand your options?" The fluent response in classical Arabic that exceeded Ahmed's own linguistic abilities created a moment of stunned silence at the table as he realized that every insulting word he had spoken had been perfectly understood by someone he had assumed was beneath his intellectual level. "Perhaps you'd also like to know that I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia University with degrees in international relations and Middle Eastern studies," Sarah continued in English, her voice calm but carrying an edge that suggested she was far from finished addressing his behavior. "And I speak 5 languages fluently, including the Arabic dialect from your home region of Lebanon, which your accent makes quite obvious despite your attempts to sound more sophisticated than your actual." Background. The revelation of Sarah's educational credentials and linguistic abilities transformed the power dynamic at the table as Ahmed realized he had catastrophically misjudged someone whose intellectual capabilities far exceeded his own despite his wealth and social status. The revelation of Sarah's educational credentials and linguistic abilities transformed the power dynamic at the table as Ahmed realized he had catastrophically misjudged someone whose intellectual capabilities far exceeded his own despite his wealth and social status. I didn't mean. Ahmed stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by obvious panic, as he understood that his cruel comments had been understood by someone who possessed both the knowledge and position to expose his behavior to consequences he hadn't anticipated. "Let me stop you right there," Sarah interrupted with the authority of someone who had clearly dealt with entitled customers before, "because your assumption that I couldn't understand your language allowed you to reveal exactly who you are as a person, and now everyone in this restaurant knows the kind of character you possess." Her response was loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables, where other diners had begun to notice the commotion and were listening with obvious interest to the confrontation unfolding between the wealthy customer and the seemingly young waitress. "You assume that because I work in service, I must be uneducated, poor, and stupid," Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the restaurant as more patrons turned to watch the drama. "But your real problem isn't that you misjudged my background. It's that you thought those characteristics would make it acceptable to insult and dehumanize another person." The moral dimension of her response elevated the confrontation beyond simple linguistic misunderstanding to address the fundamental ethics of how Ahmed treated people he considered beneath his social status. "Your wealth might buy you expensive clothes and access to exclusive restaurants," Sarah said with devastating precision. "But it clearly hasn't purchased basic human decency or the kind of education that teaches respect for other people regardless of their circumstances." The philosophical rebuke struck at the core of Ahmed's sense of superiority, challenging not just his behavior but the worldview that had enabled his cruelty towards someone he had assumed was powerless to defend herself. "Now, would you like to order dinner and behave like a civilized human being? Or would you prefer to leave and find a restaurant where the staff won't understand when you reveal your true character through casual cruelty?" Marcus Thompson's face showed obvious embarrassment as he realized his business associate had created a public relations nightmare that could potentially damage both their reputations and the merger discussions they had planned to conduct during their dinner meeting. "Ahmed, perhaps we should," Marcus began, trying to defuse a situation that was clearly spiraling beyond their control as other restaurant patrons began recording the confrontation with their phones, ensuring that Ahmed's behavior would be preserved for social media posterity. "Don't even think about it," Sarah said, addressing Marcus directly. "Your friend just spent 5 minutes insulting my intelligence, my family's economic status, and my personal worth as a human being, all because he assumed I couldn't understand his language. This isn't a misunderstanding that can be smoothed over with diplomatic language or generous tips." Her refusal to accept easy resolution reflected understanding that Ahmed's behavior represented deeper character flaws that required actual accountability rather than superficial apologies motivated by social embarrassment. "The fact that you sat there and said nothing while he insulted me tells me exactly what kind of person you are too," Sarah continued. "Because complicity with cruelty is just as revealing as the cruelty itself." The expansion of her criticism to include Marcus created additional pressure as both men realized they were facing someone who wouldn't be intimidated by their wealth or social status into accepting behavior that violated basic human dignity. "I work in this restaurant by choice, not necessity," Sarah explained to the growing audience of interested diners. "Because I believe that honest work has value regardless of the industry, and because interacting with people from different backgrounds teaches lessons about human nature that can't be learned in boardrooms or country clubs." Her defense of service work challenged elitist assumptions while establishing her moral authority to criticize customers who treated servers as inferior human beings. "But I also have other options if I choose to pursue them," Sarah added with a smile that suggested she was about to reveal information that would further embarrass the men who had underestimated her. "Including the law degree I'm completing at NYU and the job offer I have from the district attorney's office, where I'll be prosecuting white-collar crimes committed by exactly the kind of people who think their money entitles them to treat others with contempt. The smartphone videos that captured Sarah's multilingual dismantling of Ahmed's arrogance began appearing on social media within minutes of the confrontation, with restaurant patrons uploading footage to TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter using hashtags that would soon trend worldwide. "This waitress just destroyed a millionaire who thought she couldn't understand Arabic," read one viral tweet that accompanied a video showing Sarah's perfect linguistic response to Ahmed's insults. "And her comeback is absolutely savage." The clip spread rapidly through social media algorithms that favored dramatic content, reaching millions of viewers who shared the videos with commentary praising Sarah's intelligence and criticizing Ahmed's behavior. "Not all heroes wear capes," another user posted with crying laughing emojis. "This woman just gave a masterclass in how to handle entitled rich people who think service workers are beneath them." The viral nature of the content ensured that Ahmed's humiliation would extend far beyond the restaurant to include global exposure of his character and values to audiences who wouldn't soon forget his cruel assumptions and their spectacular backfire. Within hours, the hashtag Arabic waitress was trending on multiple platforms, with millions of users sharing their own stories of being underestimated based on their appearance, occupation, or background. "This is why you should never assume someone's education level based on their job," commented a professor who shared her own experience of being dismissed by students who discovered her working-class background. "Intelligence and worth aren't determined by economic status or career choice." The broader conversation that emerged from Sarah's viral moment addressed systemic issues of classism, linguistic prejudice, and the tendency to dehumanize service workers that extended far beyond one wealthy man's embarrassing evening. "As someone who speaks 4 languages, I've seen this exact scenario play out countless times," wrote a flight attendant whose comment received thousands of likes. "Entitled passengers assuming I can't understand their insults, only to discover that education and linguistic ability aren't exclusive to first-class tickets." The collective response to Ahmed's humiliation created a cultural moment that celebrated intellectual achievement while condemning the kind of prejudice that assumed intelligence correlated with economic status or social position. The restaurant management's response to the viral incident demonstrated how social media exposure could force businesses to take public stands on issues of customer behavior and employee dignity in ways that protected their reputation while supporting staff members who faced harassment. "Lou Jardin stands firmly behind our employee Sarah Thompson and condemns the discriminatory language and behavior exhibited by the customer in question," read the official statement posted on the restaurant's social media accounts. "We are proud to employ individuals of exceptional intelligence and character, and we will not tolerate harassment of our staff by patrons who mistake wealth for worth." The public support for Sarah reflected management's recognition that defending employees against abusive customers had become both a moral imperative and a business necessity in an era where viral videos could damage reputations permanently. Ms. Thompson represents the best of our values and demonstrates daily that excellence in service comes from intelligence, education, and genuine care for others. The statement continued. "Qualities that cannot be purchased with money or demonstrated through expensive clothing and accessories." The contrast between Sarah's character and Ahmed's behavior was highlighted in terms that elevated service work while condemning entitled attitudes that treated restaurant employees as inferior human beings. "We have permanently banned the individuals involved in this incident from our establishment," the management concluded. "And we encourage all businesses to recognize that creating safe, respectful environments for employees is not just good policy, it's basic human decency." The decisive action taken by restaurant leadership sent a message to both employees and customers that harassment would not be tolerated regardless of the economic status of those involved, establishing clear boundaries about acceptable behavior in their establishment. The statement went viral independently, with business owners and managers sharing it as an example of how to respond appropriately when employees face discrimination or abuse from customers who believed their money entitled them to treat others poorly. The institutional response to Sarah's situation created precedent for how businesses could support employees while maintaining professional standards that respected human dignity regardless of social or economic hierarchies. The legal implications of Ahmed's public humiliation began to emerge when employment lawyers and civil rights advocates highlighted how his behavior could constitute workplace harassment and create hostile work environments that violated numerous state and federal regulations. What this customer did represents textbook harassment based on perceived national origin, economic status, and educational background, explained attorney Jennifer Martinez during a television interview about the viral incident. And his assumption that the employee couldn't understand his language doesn't protect him from legal consequences of his discriminatory statements. The analysis provided educational value for viewers while highlighting how casual prejudice could have serious legal ramifications when it occurred in workplace settings where employees had rights to dignity and respect. The fact that he specifically targeted her intelligence, family background, and personal worth creates a pattern of harassment that goes beyond simple rudeness into territory that employment law recognizes as creating hostile work environments, Martinez continued. And businesses have legal obligations to protect employees from this kind of treatment regardless of who's doing it. The expert commentary helped audiences understand that Sarah's situation represented broader legal protections for workers who faced discrimination or harassment from customers, employers, or colleagues who believed economic or social status provided immunity from accountability. Social media documentation of harassment incidents is becoming increasingly important in employment law, Martinez noted, because video evidence makes it impossible for harassers to deny their behavior or claim their statements were misunderstood or taken out of context. The observation reflected how technology was changing the landscape of workplace protection by providing concrete evidence of harassment that had previously been difficult to prove in legal proceedings. This case will likely become a teaching tool for employment lawyers and human resources professionals, Martinez concluded, because it perfectly illustrates how assumptions about someone's background can lead to behavior that violates both legal standards and basic human decency. The educational value of Sarah's experience extended beyond entertainment to provide real-world examples of how harassment operated and could be addressed through legal and social accountability measures. The educational institutions mentioned in Sarah's response to Ahmed's harassment quickly claimed her as an example of their commitment to producing graduates who could excel in any professional environment while maintaining dignity and moral courage. "We are incredibly proud of Sarah Thompson, who exemplifies the intellectual excellence and ethical leadership that define Columbia University graduates," read a statement from her alma mater that was shared across their social media platforms with photos of Sarah receiving academic honors. Her response to discrimination demonstrates the kind of critical thinking, cultural competency, and moral courage that our programs are designed to develop in students who will become leaders in their chosen fields. The institutional endorsement elevated Sarah's viral moment into an example of educational success while condemning the prejudice she had faced from someone who confused wealth with wisdom. Ms. Thompson's multilingual abilities and cross-cultural understanding represent exactly the kind of global perspective that modern leaders need to navigate our interconnected world, the statement continued. And her dignity in the face of harassment shows character that cannot be taught but can be inspired through exposure to diverse ideas and rigorous intellectual challenge. The academic recognition transformed Sarah's restaurant confrontation into a teaching moment about the value of liberal education and cultural competency in developing citizens who could respond to prejudice with knowledge rather than anger. "We encourage all our graduates to follow Sarah's example of using their education to defend dignity and promote understanding," the university concluded. Because true leadership means standing up for others who face discrimination while demonstrating that intelligence and worth exist in every profession and social situation. The educational angle of Sarah's story resonated with audiences who saw her response as validation of academic achievement and proof that education provided tools for confronting ignorance and prejudice in real-world situations. The institutional pride in Sarah's performance created additional pressure on Ahmed while celebrating the kind of character development that higher education was supposed to foster in students who would become tomorrow's leaders. The contrast between Sarah's educated response and Ahmed's ignorant assumptions highlighted the difference between true sophistication and mere wealth accumulation. The business consequences of Ahmed's viral humiliation began to unfold within days as his company's clients, partners, and investors discovered his character through social media exposure that revealed behavior inconsistent with the professional image he had cultivated throughout his career. Hassan Development Group's association with discriminatory behavior and harassment of service workers raises serious questions about company culture and ethical standards, wrote a prominent real estate journalist whose investigative article prompted deeper scrutiny of Ahmed's business practices and personal conduct. The media attention forced Ahmed's company into damage control mode as they attempted to distance the organization from his personal behavior while managing client relationships that were threatened by association with viral harassment incident. Several major clients have already terminated contracts with Hassan Development citing reputational concerns, the article continued. And sources within the company suggest that Ahmed Hassan's behavior has created internal discussions about leadership changes that could reshape the organization's future. The financial implications of social media exposure demonstrated how personal conduct could have devastating professional consequences in an interconnected world where character flaws could become global knowledge within hours. The merger discussions with Thompson Real Estate have been suspended indefinitely, reported business news outlets that followed the story's impact on Hassan's corporate relationships, with sources indicating that Marcus Thompson's firm cannot proceed with partnerships that might associate them with discriminatory behavior captured on video. The revelation that Ahmed's harassment had cost him a $2 billion business opportunity provided concrete evidence of how viral moments could transform personal embarrassment into career-ending financial catastrophe. Hassan Development's stock price has dropped 15% since the restaurant incident, financial analysts noted, reflecting investor concerns about leadership stability and potential legal liabilities associated with the CEO's public behavior. The market response to Ahmed's character exposure highlighted how social media accountability could translate into immediate economic consequences for individuals whose behavior violated contemporary standards of professional conduct and human decency. The speed with which Ahmed's business empire began to crumble demonstrated the power of social media to enforce social norms through economic pressure that traditional accountability mechanisms couldn't match. The personal relationships that Ahmed had cultivated within New York's wealthy social circles began to deteriorate as friends and associates distanced themselves from someone whose behavior had become synonymous with entitled cruelty and cultural insensitivity. "I can't be associated with someone who treats people that way," explained socialite Patricia Windsor during a charity gala where Ahmed's absence was noted by multiple attendees. "My reputation and my causes are too important to risk association with that kind of character." The social ostracism that followed his viral humiliation demonstrated how digital exposure could disrupt elite networks that had previously protected wealthy individuals from consequences of their private behavior. "The country club is reviewing his membership," whispered another member during the same event, because several families have complained that they don't want their children exposed to someone who models that kind of treatment towards service workers. The institutional response to Ahmed's behavior reflected how viral incidents could prompt organizations to enforce character standards that went beyond financial qualifications for membership or participation. "His foundation work has been quietly terminated," noted a charity organizer who declined to be named, "because donors don't want their contributions associated with someone who became famous for humiliating a waitress based on prejudiced assumptions about her education and worth." The philanthropic consequences of Ahmed's behavior demonstrated how social media exposure could contaminate even positive activities when personal character was revealed to be inconsistent with charitable values. "It's not just what he said," explained another former associate. "It's the assumption that someone working in service must be stupid and poor, and that those characteristics would make harassment acceptable. That reveals a worldview that's incompatible with the kind of leadership roles he's held in our community." The analysis of Ahmed's prejudices highlighted how his viral moment had exposed deeper character flaws that went beyond linguistic insensitivity to encompass fundamental disrespect for human dignity based on economic and social status. The social consequences of his behavior created isolation that wealth couldn't cure and reputation damage that money couldn't repair. The wealthy circles that had once welcomed Ahmed now viewed him as a liability whose presence threatened their own social standing and philanthropic effectiveness. The legal team that Ahmed assembled to manage the fallout from his viral harassment incident quickly discovered that their client's behavior had created multiple vulnerabilities that extended beyond simple public relations problems into potential civil and criminal liability. Mr. Hassan's statements could be construed as harassment based on perceived national origin and economic status, explained employment attorney David Chen during a consultation that revealed the scope of Ahmed's potential legal exposure. And the public nature of the incident creates additional complications related to defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The legal analysis demonstrated how social media documentation of harassment could provide evidence for various civil claims while complicating traditional defense strategies that relied on disputing facts or intent. The restaurant's decision to permanently ban Mr. Hassan creates precedent for other businesses to take similar action, Chin continued. And his behavior could trigger investigations by civil rights organizations that are looking for test cases to establish stronger protections for service workers. The broader legal implications of Ahmed's incident extended beyond his personal situation to encompass workplace protection issues that affected millions of service industry employees who faced similar harassment without viral documentation to support their claims. We're also concerned about potential impact on his business licenses and professional certifications, Chin noted, because several regulatory bodies have character requirements that could be triggered by documented harassment incidents that demonstrate unfitness for positions of trust. The professional licensing implications revealed how viral moments could create cascading consequences that affected someone's ability to conduct business rather than just their social reputation or personal relationships. The most concerning aspect is that Mr. Hassan's behavior was captured on multiple camera angles with clear audio, Chen concluded, making it impossible to dispute what happened or claim that his statements were misunderstood or taken out of context. This is exactly the kind of evidence that makes civil rights cases impossible to defend. The legal vulnerability that Ahmed faced reflected how social media documentation could transform harassment from difficult-to-prove interpersonal conflicts into clear-cut legal violations with concrete evidence and multiple witnesses. The attorney's assessment painted a picture of legal exposure that extended far beyond Ahmed's initial assumption that insulting someone in Arabic would have no consequences because she couldn't understand or respond to his comments. The psychological impact of global humiliation began to affect Ahmed's mental health as he struggled to cope with the transformation from respected businessman to international symbol of entitled prejudice whose behavior had been condemned by millions of strangers. He's become completely isolated, reported a family member who requested anonymity. Because everywhere he goes, people recognize him from the videos and either confront him about his behavior or avoid him entirely. The social consequences of viral fame for negative behavior created a form of public accountability that traditional consequences couldn't match in terms of scope and persistence. The worst part is that he genuinely didn't understand why what he said was wrong, the family member continued. Because he's lived his whole life in circles where looking down on service workers was normal, and he never questioned whether that attitude was appropriate or moral. The insight into Ahmed's mindset revealed how wealth and privilege could create moral blind spots that prevented recognition of basic human dignity regardless of economic or social status. Now he's forced to confront the fact that his values are fundamentally incompatible with contemporary standards of human decency, the family member observed. And that's a difficult psychological adjustment for someone who's never had to examine his assumptions about other people. The personal reckoning that Ahmed faced involved more than career consequences to encompass fundamental questions about character and worldview that had been exposed through his interaction with someone he had underestimated. He's in therapy now, the family member concluded, trying to understand how his behavior affected Sarah and what it reveals about the kind of person he's become. But it's going to be a long process of rebuilding both his character and his relationships with other people. The acknowledgement of psychological support reflected recognition that Ahmed's viral moment had created opportunities for personal growth as well as professional and social consequences. The transformation from unconscious prejudice to forced self-reflection represented the kind of character development that his wealth and privilege had previously allowed him to avoid through social isolation from people who might challenge his assumptions. The therapeutic process that Ahmed entered represented recognition that his behavior had revealed character defects that required professional intervention to address effectively. The opportunities that emerged from Sarah's viral moment transformed her from restaurant server to sought-after speaker and advocate for service worker dignity while advancing her legal career through visibility that money couldn't buy. Law firms are competing to offer her positions, reported legal news outlets that followed the career impact of her viral confrontation. Because her demonstration of intelligence, composure, and moral courage under pressure represents exactly the kind of character that clients want representing their interests. The professional recognition that resulted from her handling of harassment provided concrete benefits that validated her choice to respond publicly rather than ignore Ahmed's behavior or handle the situation privately. The district attorney's office has accelerated her hiring process, noted employment sources, and several judges have specifically requested that she be assigned to their courts because they're impressed with her ability to handle difficult people while maintaining professional standards. The legal community's response to Sarah's viral moment demonstrated how public displays of character could enhance professional reputation in fields where integrity and composure were essential qualifications. She's been invited to speak at universities about linguistic diversity and workplace dignity, added academic sources, because her story illustrates how education and cultural competency can be used to respond to prejudice in ways that create positive change rather than just personal satisfaction. The speaking opportunities reflected recognition that Sarah's experience had educational value beyond entertainment, providing lessons about standing up to harassment while maintaining moral authority. The Restaurant Industry Association wants her to develop training programs for handling customer harassment, business sources revealed, because her approach demonstrates how employees can defend themselves without escalating situations or compromising customer service standards. The professional consulting opportunities that emerged from her viral moment created new career paths that built on her demonstrated expertise in handling difficult interpersonal situations with grace and effectiveness. The transformation of Sarah's restaurant confrontation into multiple career opportunities demonstrated how viral moments could create positive outcomes when individuals responded to adversity with intelligence and dignity rather than anger or revenge. The recognition she received validated her educational achievements while challenging stereotypes about service work and the people who chose such employment. The media attention surrounding Sarah's story prompted broader conversations about language bias, educational assumptions, and the treatment of service workers that addressed systemic issues rather than just individual behavior. Sarah's story highlights how people make assumptions about intelligence based on appearance, accent, or occupation, noted Dr. Maria Santos during a television interview about linguistic prejudice, and how those assumptions can lead to behavior that reveals the prejudiced person's character rather than anything meaningful about their target. The academic analysis of Sarah's experience provided educational framework for understanding how bias operated in everyday interactions while celebrating her response as a model for confronting discrimination. The fact that she responded in perfect Arabic while maintaining professional composure shows how education can be used as a tool for dignity rather than just personal advancement. Dr. Santos continued, and her choice to address the behavior publicly rather than privately demonstrates understanding that harassment affects communities, not just individuals. The sociological perspective on Sarah's viral moment emphasized how individual responses to prejudice could create broader social change by exposing unacceptable behavior while modeling appropriate alternatives. Her story is being used in diversity training programs, noted corporate consultants, because it perfectly illustrates how assumptions about people based on their work or appearance can lead to embarrassing revelations about our own character and values. The educational applications of Sarah's experience extended her impact beyond personal vindication to encompass systematic efforts to reduce workplace harassment and cultural prejudice. She's become a symbol of how education and dignity can triumph over wealth and prejudice, concluded social media analysts. And her story continues to inspire people who face similar situations in their own workplaces and communities. The broader cultural impact of Sarah's response to harassment created lasting change that extended far beyond her individual experience to influence policies, training programs, and social attitudes about respect and dignity in professional environments. The viral nature of her story ensured that millions of people learned valuable lessons about the consequences of prejudiced assumptions and the power of education to defend human dignity against discrimination. The educational institutions that claimed Sarah as an example of their success began incorporating her story into curricula that addressed multicultural competency and professional ethics. The scholarship opportunities that were created in Sarah's name reflected recognition that her story represented broader values about education, opportunity, and the use of knowledge to defend human dignity against prejudice and discrimination. Columbia University has established the Sarah Thompson Scholarship for students from service industry backgrounds who are pursuing careers in law and public service, announced university officials during a ceremony that honored her viral response to workplace harassment, because her story demonstrates that intelligence and leadership potential exist in every profession and social situation. The academic recognition of Sarah's character created lasting opportunities for other students while celebrating the value of diverse professional experiences in developing well-rounded leaders. The scholarship will prioritize students who have worked in service industries while pursuing their education, explained the university's dean of students. Because Sarah's example shows how such experience can develop empathy, communication skills, and understanding of different social perspectives that enhance professional effectiveness. The criteria for the scholarship reflected recognition that Sarah's restaurant experience had contributed to rather than detracted from her professional development and character formation. Law schools across the country are implementing similar programs, noted educational reporters. Because Sarah's story has highlighted how traditional assumptions about professional backgrounds can overlook talented individuals who bring unique perspectives and experiences to legal careers. The institutional response to Sarah's viral moment created systematic changes that would benefit future generations of students while honoring her contribution to advancing workplace dignity and respect. The most important aspect of these scholarships, observed educational policy experts, is that they recognize service work as valuable professional experience rather than something to be overcome or hidden from future employers. The shift in perspective about service industry experience reflected broader changes in how educational institutions and employers evaluated candidates for competitive programs and positions. Sarah's story has forced us to examine our own biases about what constitutes valuable professional experience, admitted law school admissions officers, and to recognize that character and intelligence are demonstrated through behavior rather than just academic credentials or family background. The long-term impact of Sarah's viral moment on educational policy and practice created lasting change that extended far beyond her individual situation to benefit countless other students who had been overlooked due to assumptions about their professional backgrounds. The legislative impact of Sarah's viral harassment incident began to emerge as lawmakers recognized the need for stronger protections for service workers who faced discrimination and abuse from customers who believed their economic status provided immunity from accountability. The Sarah Thompson Act will establish clear legal protections for service industry employees who face harassment based on perceived intelligence, education, or economic status, announced state legislators who had been inspired by her story to address systematic problems in workplace protection, and will create civil penalties for customers whose behavior creates hostile work environments for employees. The proposed legislation reflected recognition that Sarah's experience represented broader patterns of harassment that affected millions of service workers who lacked viral documentation to support their claims for dignity and respect. The law will allow businesses to seek damages from customers who harass employees, explained legal advocates who had worked on the bill's language, creating financial consequences for behavior that currently has no legal accountability beyond being asked to leave establishments. The innovative approach to workplace protection recognized that traditional employment law focused on employer-employee relationships while ignoring customer behavior that could create hostile work environments for service staff. Sarah's case provides perfect documentation of how harassment operates in service industries, noted civil rights lawyers who supported the legislation, and her viral response demonstrates that education and dignity can triumph over wealth and prejudice when supported by appropriate legal frameworks. The legislative momentum created by her story reflected how individual moments of courage could catalyze systematic changes that protected entire categories of workers from harassment and discrimination. The most important aspect of this legislation, concluded employment law experts, is that it recognizes service workers as professionals who deserve the same workplace protections available to employees in other industries. The legal recognition of service work as legitimate professional activity worthy of protection represented a significant shift in how employment law addressed harassment and discrimination in customer-facing industries. Sarah's story has become a rallying point for service worker rights, observed labor advocates, because it perfectly illustrates how assumptions about intelligence and worth can lead to behavior that violates basic human dignity. The lasting impact of her viral moment on legal protections for service workers created change that would benefit millions of employees who faced similar harassment without the educational credentials or linguistic abilities that had allowed Sarah to defend herself so effectively. The international attention that Sarah's story received highlighted similar issues of classism and linguistic prejudice in service industries around the world, creating global conversations about respect, dignity, and the treatment of workers regardless of their economic or social status. Sarah's response to harassment has resonated with service workers in dozens of countries, reported international media outlets that covered the global impact of her viral moment, because the assumption that service work indicates low intelligence or education is a universal form of prejudice that transcends cultural boundaries. The cross-cultural relevance of her experience demonstrated how viral social media content could address universal human issues while celebrating individual courage and dignity. Restaurant workers in Paris, hotel staff in Tokyo, and retail employees in London have all shared similar stories inspired by Sarah's example. Noted social media analysts who tracked the global spread of her story, creating an international movement that demands respect for service industry employees regardless of customers' wealth or social position. The worldwide response to Ahmed's harassment and Sarah's response created solidarity among service workers who had previously felt isolated in their experiences of customer abuse and discrimination. The most powerful aspect of Sarah's story, observed international labor advocates, is how it demonstrates that education and dignity can triumph over wealth and prejudice regardless of cultural context or language barriers. The universal themes in her viral moment transcended national boundaries to create shared understanding about the value of service work and the importance of treating all people with respect regardless of their professional circumstances. Her story is being translated into dozens of languages, reported digital media researchers, because the core message about human dignity and respect resonates across all cultures and economic systems. The global impact of Sarah's confrontation with Ahmed created lasting change in how service workers around the world understood their worth and defended their dignity against harassment and discrimination. The hashtag #RespectServiceWorkers hashtag has been used in protests and advocacy campaigns on every continent, noted international civil rights organizations, demonstrating how individual moments of courage can inspire global movements for social change. The transformation of Sarah's restaurant experience into an international symbol of resistance to harassment reflected the power of social media to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. The lasting legacy of her viral moment continued to inspire service workers worldwide to demand respect while challenging customers to examine their own assumptions about intelligence, worth, and human dignity. The long-term impact of Sarah's viral moment continued to influence discussions about respect, dignity, and the value of service work in ways that elevated entire industries while challenging classist assumptions about intelligence and worth. Restaurant workers nationwide have shared their own stories inspired by Sarah's example, reported labor advocates, creating a movement that demands respect for service industry employees regardless of customers' economic status or social position. The collective response to Sarah's story created momentum for policy changes that protected service workers from harassment while establishing clear consequences for customers who violated basic standards of human decency. Several states are considering legislation that would allow businesses to sue customers for harassment of employees, noted legal analysts, using Sarah's case as an example of how viral documentation can provide evidence for civil rights violations that were previously difficult to prosecute. The legislative implications of her experience demonstrated how individual moments of courage could catalyze broader social change that benefited entire communities of workers who faced similar challenges. Her law school has created a scholarship in her name for students interested in civil rights and employment law, announced academic sources. Because her story demonstrates how legal education can be used to defend human dignity in everyday situations rather than just courtroom battles. The institutional recognition of Sarah's impact created lasting educational opportunities while honoring her contribution to advancing workplace dignity and respect. The most important lesson from Sarah's story, concluded employment rights advocates, is that intelligence, education, and worth exist in every profession and social situation, and that treating people with respect isn't just good manners. It's basic human decency that reveals our own character more than anything else. The philosophical foundation of respect for human dignity that emerged from her viral moment created lasting change in how society understood the relationship between wealth, education, and moral character. Sarah has become a symbol of how individual courage can create social change, observed cultural critics. And her story continues to inspire people who face discrimination to respond with dignity rather than anger. The enduring impact of her confrontation with Ahmed demonstrated how viral moments could transcend entertainment to create meaningful social progress when individuals chose to respond to adversity with intelligence, composure, and moral courage. The transformation of a restaurant harassment incident into a global movement for service worker dignity reflected the power of social media to amplify important social justice issues while celebrating the kind of character and values that created positive change in the world.